Well, ladies and gentlemen, in light of all the bacchanal that took place over the weekend, this morning we are chatting with the Public Relations Officer of the Trinidad and Tobago Promoters Association, Ms. Paige De Leon, who the association is calling for legislative reform when it comes to protection for promoters, creatives, and audience members who attend events. Good morning to you, Paige.
Good morning to you, Rokas, and good morning to all of your viewers in Trinidad and Tobago and abroad, because we know that this story has certainly walked away from our shores.
Most definitely. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Paige. Tell me why the need for reform, and what reform are we looking at when we talk about the entertainment sector?
So, one of the things that the Trinidad and Tobago Promoters Association has consistently asked for is legislation that is modern and fit for purpose and very specific to the conduct of the entertainment sector. When we first perceived the legislation, we didn't necessarily consider it in the context of contractual arrangements that take place between artists and event producers, and in this case, more importantly, between members of the public and event producers. Because what we now have is a scenario where after Saturday's show, we've really got to look at how we engage our public when it comes to things like purchases of tickets and whether or not there is some kind of arrangement that can be made in the event that a performer doesn't show up. So we have to look at drafting legislation that now contemplates all of the eventualities that we find when we're having an event, because sometimes things go wrong. And one of the things that I said yesterday was every event producer, every business person is 2 steps away from a catastrophe. And we've got to start looking at how we legislate and create policy to protect all of the actors in that little ecosystem that is producing an event.
Paige, can you tell me what sort of legislation exists currently as it pertains to this same topic?
So there isn't any specific legislation for events. What we have, and as I'm not an attorney, I do hope that I'm not in a space of error, but we have regular contractual law which governs all sorts of contracts. And they will have, specific interpretations that deal with this type of contract. And then, of course, we have the dance hall and occasional bar license acts that govern the ability of an event producer to get a license. And then, of course, you have the EMA regulations that governs that element of things. So there's a couple pieces of legislation that have to come together and be co-opted to be able to have an event. What we think we need is one piece of legislation that governs this. The event sector and our party space, our festival space, our conference space has such an impact economically on our country. We think that it's time for us to have laws that govern how we conduct ourselves as a tourism service provider. And also, that legislation, we hope, and those policies, we hope, will guide people towards a better understanding of the fact that we are members of the tourism sector. And that will then sort of shape the way that this legislation is looked at and shape the way that people perceive the offerings that are being made by the event production sector.
All right, so Paige, I want to break down a little bit in terms of what we're discussing here exactly, because you mentioned protection for the promoters or the producers of the event, you mentioned protection for the artists involved in the event, and you mentioned protection for the patrons of the event. In dealing with the artists and the promoters side of things, they usually, and I mean, I've been hearing this at all the Music TT conferences, we've been hearing it all the time, that the importance of contracts, right? And people would have had their contracts between the artist and the producer, which is one aspect of protection. So the artist is protected as well as the producer is protected because they both agreed to this contract, yeah? On the other side, where the patron is concerned, they would have purchased a ticket saying, all right, I am buying the opportunity to see or to experience this event, whatever the event is, be it a concert, a party, a show, whatever the case may be. I noticed that in particular with this concert, there was a huge statement on the ticket and on the purchasing about refunds and a lack of refund. And of course, in the situation that happened, that was the first question that came out of people's mouths, is that where can I get my refund? I don't want to go to this anymore because the person that I was paying to see is not coming. I know that there is law as it pertains to consumer rights, where we aren't allowed to actually say you can't get a refund. So tell me, what additional protection do we need from in terms specifically when it comes to entertainment, because we have the consumer affairs law. Wouldn't that cover part of what we're discussing here in terms of the refund protection for the actual patrons of the event?
So, if I were to answer you specifically, I would be acting as a judge in this situation, and that is not wise. What needs to happen in a case like this is that the matter needs to be able to go through the courts in its specificity so a judge can decide where the law falls in this particular context. And that's the beauty of the courts. That's the beauty of the law. We sometimes have a tendency to look at, a judicial review or some kind of court proceedings as something negative. It's not, this is not a prosecution. This is an interrogation of the law and how it speaks specifically to an event. And that decision then becomes precedent so that in the future, people can have a less difficult time discerning what their rights are or aren't. And that is the beauty of the situation. That's the gift I think that the industry has been given. Rokas, if I'm to be fair, this is an opportunity for us to take a pause and determine how we move forward because our sector is getting bigger. Trinidad and Tobago's reputation as an event producer is significant worldwide. Our practitioners are being invited out of Trinidad, not just the artists now, but the event producers. People are looking at us and they are saying, you guys are absolutely great at this particular thing. We want you to come and run our events. We want you to come and bring your models here. And if that is the case, then, there's a saying that a friend of mine always says, dance a yard before you dance abroad. And so we have to make sure that the dance at home is elegant and as seamless as possible, and that we really, really have things together properly. And the Trinidad and Tobago sector is running efficiently. And when things like this happen, it's not trauma, because I think that what I sense from the whole thing is that the country is traumatized by it because it's all everybody can talk about, and rightfully so.
Now, Paige, it's interesting because you mentioned this one event as the traumatic one. And we've had I want to say, a series of events that have been fairly traumatic.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. We've had a.
how do we then hold these producers, promoters, or is it the artists? Who do we hold up to account if we were to implement this legislation? Because at the end of the day, is it that we can say, all right, if you're not a member of the Trinidad and Tobago Promoters Association, you're not allowed to do an event because you wouldn't pass this amount of, the regulations or the test to be able to say, well, you are qualified to be a producer or promoter in Trinidad and Tobago? Or is it that we just let what happens in every other industry happen, where the cream of the crop, they rise? The people who will get the invitations to go outside, the people who will get the opportunity to do these type of events, they would naturally rise, and the people who can't do them would naturally, I guess, just natural selection, they fall to the wayside.
There are a couple of elements in your question. I'll try to address all of them individually. The first one is that who do we blame question. I don't think that that's valuable. I understand why it's being asked. I understand why people are looking at this for some kind of punishment, if I'm to be frank, for someone. But I don't know that that's the value of the conversation now. And I do not think that a law can specifically punish one party. What the law is going to do is create parameters within which people are supposed to operate. And if you walk outside or you color outside of those lines, it means that the law is going to treat with you in a particular way, whether it is the artist, whether it is the patron, whether it is the event producer. I don't know that in this case, blaming somebody at this point. I don't know. I don't know what the value of it is. Same and except people want to get their money back. Those are the facts of the thing. With regard to quality of event producer and how people function, that's what the world is like. The world is a marketplace. And if you do well and if you color inside the lines and your reputation is good, as we say here, your name good, you're going to get the work. That's just how it goes. So I think that sort of speaks to both of your questions. And with regard to crafting this legislation, the key, in my humble opinion, at this point with any piece of legislation is two things: consultation with the people of today who practice in the area the lawyers of today who practice in areas and similar areas where you have similar challenges. All of those people really should, if we have an ideal scenario, come together, sit down, have a conversation. What are the eventualities that we face? How do the current laws that we have protect us or not protect us? And what can we do to put a piece of legislation in place that deals with today and what's happening now? The second part is legislation has to be something that can be changed or amended as time goes on. Because when the Occasional Bar and Dancehall License Acts were formed, they were fit for the purposes of the legislators in those days. They are now no longer fit for purpose. We don't have the same social parameters, the same social conditions we had then. So we need to fix the laws, and whatever we put in place has to be able to move with us as we develop, as we grow. Because we now have simple things like, I know there was a big controversy recently with the actors in the United States about artificial intelligence being infused into their business model. That's not something that was legislatively contemplated 30 years ago. And 30 years ago is a short time. So we have to look at how we make legislation that's fit for today, but that can also grow as we grow.
But Paige, we've had that challenge when it comes to our constitution, generally speaking. We've heard people in the various sectors talking about the need for constitutional reform, the need for upgrading the constitution, bringing it into this century, or at least bringing it into today, like you mentioned. Why would the government put priority on the entertainment sector? Why should they?
The government should, so not would, but the government should be prioritizing any sector where there is the potential for explosive economic growth. That is the key. If a government comes into office, and these are personal opinions now as opposed to the views of the TTP, because we haven't examined this particular area. But in my opinion, if a government comes into office and they're looking at how to grow an economy and how to use modern social conditions to ensure that their people have bread on their table, straightforward, simple things, then what they would necessarily and naturally do is look at those areas where there's an opportunity for growth. I need to find money that I didn't have yesterday. Where is that money located? In one of these cases, it's located in the entertainment sector. I'm looking for foreign exchange more specifically than local dollars. Where can I find that? In the entertainment sector, in a variety of ways. The entertainment sector provides something of a part of the solution that any government coming into office in Trinidad and Tobago now needs to be looking at. And that would really be the reason why this legislation is put to the front of the table. This is not to say that I'm comparing it to any of the other areas that have more, importance than this. That's not the conversation. The conversation is, if we are to go to the front of the line or even to the fifth of the line, why? That's one of the reasons. The second reason is, we don't really want another situation like what happened on Wednesday to happen on last week, Saturday, to anyone, to no business person, to no patron, to no artist, and to not to brand Trinidad and Tobago, because so many different people have been impacted by this. It's not just the promoter, everybody vexed with him, fine. But people are also looking at this performer who has come and found himself in a situation over which he had no control. His reputation is now damaged. Trinidad and Tobago's brand as an event producer, their reputation is now damaged. People in other parts of the world are now talking about the size of the fee that was paid to this artist. That's challenging, not just for him, but for people in reggae, in that particular genre of music. They now have to treat with why you're charging so much money. Soca artists are now talking about, well, if you're paying them this, why not paying me that? It's a real mishmash of challenge and concern. Nobody wants to have to deal with that, because people really just want to get on with their business. And that is why it's important to put mechanisms and policy in place to govern things so that it's reasonably peaceful, if that is a thing. I don't know
One
if that's a
question,
thing,
Paige.
but
One question before we wrap this morning. In terms of, you mentioned, the opportunity for the forex to be able to earn forex for the country, right? But we've seen in situations where we have these international acts come into the country, they don't want to be paid in TT dollars. They want to be paid in that same forex that we're talking about. So if we are able to say, well, all right, we're bringing down these international artists, be it for this show, be it for any show in the future, a jazz festival, whatever the case may be, and we bring in these artists and they're being paid in US. Tell me how the opportunity arises for us Trinidad and Tobago to earn that forex if we're giving it away by the million, apparently.
So in this particular situation where there is a foreign act, you're paying in US, just like you're paying for any raw material in US. There are lots and lots of things that come into Trinidad and Tobago and we have to pay in US because the people don't live here. In this case, what we would see is national economic movement, national money moving around because people are going to the shops, they're buying things, different companies are being paid as service providers. So in this particular case, it may not be an opportunity to earn foreign exchange, but there are other elements of the entertainment sector where we can earn foreign exchange. So the legislation won't just deal with this situation. It will deal with all of the scenarios where people are leaving the country and they are earning money and they are coming back. But more than that, people who want to come to Trinidad to see a big show because there were people who flew into the country. And as we know, there are many events that happen in Trinidad and Tobago where people leave wherever they are, they fly in, they rent a hotel, they come, they spend their money. So it's as simple as that, as baseline as a foreigner coming in to see a big show. That's earning foreign exchange right there. And
All right.
that needs to be protected.
I hear you. All right, Paige. Well, thank you very much for joining us this morning and for sharing your thoughts. And we look forward to seeing how this comes together. And hopefully we can get some of that legislation in place to protect the audience, to protect the creatives, to protect the promoters as well. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. And thanks to your viewers. Everybody be safe. And, yeah, let's keep it pumping.
Take care, Paige. That's Paige De Leon, the Public Relations Officer for the Trinidad and Tobago Promoters Association, chatting with us a bit about the need for reform as it pertains to the legislation surrounding the entertainment